If Anthony Albanese's early campaign stuff-ups on the economy and boats weren't bad enough, his deputy's subsequent kowtowing to China and ignorance over the weekend of Labor's climate taxes demonstrate that this is an opposition unfit to govern. If the leader and the deputy are this ill-prepared, policy ignorant and indeed compromised, God help our country if they win office in just 4 weeks' time. It's bad enough that Mr Marles argued as late as last year that Australia should welcome China's increased presence in the South Pacific. But the further revelation that his 2019 trip to Beijing was paid for by a pro-China think tank, as well as subsidised by you, the taxpayer, but not properly declared, and that he'd given his largely pro-China speech to China's local embassy for vetting, shows that the would-be Deputy Prime Minister and would-be Labor Defence Minister is not just soft on China, but a genuine risk. The fact that Marles tried to bury the speech, making sure it wasn't on his public website, and that he didn't draw attention to his trip by any parliamentary disclosures, underlines just how dodgy this is, and dodgy enough that he knew he had to hide it. It's no wonder that Labor put Marles in witness protection for a few days last week, because when he came out eventually, out of hiding on the weekend, the Manchurian candidate exposed another massive weakness. He doesn't have a clue about Labor's policy for a carbon tax by stealth on the whole of Australia's coal industry and many of our heavy industry. Here he is on Saturday showing about as much knowledge of his own climate policy as his leader did on the unemployment rate.
What do you estimate the cost of a carbon credit will be if they have to buy?
We are really clear about where we need to go, and we have been completely transparent, more than any opposition has ever been.
Now, you're the deputy leader. Will they have to buy carbon credits?
Yeah.
No, you're the deputy leader. You don't need the shadow treasurer. Surely you would know. No, Mr Marles, can you please come back? No, I'm asking the deputy leader because Mr Albanese isn't here. Does the deputy leader know if they will have to buy carbon credits? It's a simple question. He's behind you. Can we not ask him?
The coal industry is going to play a really important part in our country for a long time to come.
I don't think you've answered it. Will they have to buy carbon credits if they go beyond it?
We've given you the answers that we've given you.
It was embarrassing to watch. He's not a backbencher, he's the deputy leader, and if Labor's elected to form a government, he will be the Deputy Prime Minister. But it turns out that Marles is not the only Labor MP who's ignorant about their policy on hitting coal with a carbon tax. The junior Energy Minister, Pat Conroy, says that local mines won't have to buy carbon credits because they won't be expected to face higher costs than their overseas competitors. The member for the coal seat of Paterson, Meryl Swanson, she says that coal mines will each have to negotiate their own deals with the Clean Energy Regulator. And Labor's Senate Leader Penny Wong says that there's nothing to see here because Labor would just use an emissions-intensive mechanism that's already been put in place by the coalition. Now, it's true that in order to get the carbon tax repeal bills through the Senate, the coalition did put in place provisions to penalise businesses that increase their emissions intensity above a certain baseline. The point, though, is the coalition has never used this mechanism in 7 years, not once. Yet Labor's now proposing to use it as a carbon tax by stealth on Australia's most emitting businesses, hitting them hard and the thousands of blue-collar workers they employ. If elected, Labor will require these businesses, each emitting over 100,000 tonnes a year, to phase down to 25,000 tonnes. And if they can't, force them to buy carbon credits to make up the excess. 100,000 tonnes down to 25. The government has calculated that buying these credits will eventually be a carbon tax equivalent of at least $1.5 billion a year to be paid by consumers or make these businesses so uncompetitive they can't pass the costs on, they just shut down. National Party Senator Matt Canavan points out that 17 of the 215 businesses that will face this new Labor carbon tax are in the Hunter region of New South Wales, where the Nationals hope they'll win Joel Fitzgibbon's old seat. There are 10,000 people directly employed by these 17 large emitters, including the Tomago aluminium smelter. And Tomago is a smelter we need for our manufacturing and national security. This is why the ignorance of Labor's would-be Deputy Prime Minister matters.
The question has been answered. The question has been answered.
You can answer it again. Will they have to buy carbon credits if they go beyond their baseline?
Well, the question has been answered.
He couldn't answer the question. There was no yes or no. It was a typical study in fudging and obfuscation. How can Labor go to the election not being able to tell all those workers and their families and their towns that rely on these businesses how Labor's new carbon tax is going to affect their jobs? And let's not forget here, Labor's energy shadow, Chris Bowen, another frontbencher who's not up to the job. Bowen, you'll remember, the Immigration Minister when we received the most votes in Australian history, and the Treasury shadow at the last election said, if you don't like our policies, don't vote for us. In a recent interview with the Financial Review, Bowen reiterated that all 215 high-emitting businesses would be required to steadily reduce their emissions, and failed to mention any special deal for coal mines. Now, he says, there'll indeed be a specially tailored policy for each coal mine, but that the details will only be worked out and told to you after the election.
So yes, we will require the 215 emitters to reduce their emissions to net zero by 2050.
So does that
is what the Business Council has asked to happen.
Does it include coal mines?
Yes.
It includes.
Yes, and the Clean Energy Regulator will work with each facility, each of the 215 facilities.
They are making it up as they go along. And what's clear from all this confusion is that Labor doesn't just have a quasi-carbon tax to raise energy prices and drive jobs offshore, but it also has one hell of a lot of second-rate frontbenchers who aren't on top of their own policies. Look at the energy mess in Europe. Look at the 54% or more increases in the cost of heating fuel in the UK. Look at how dependent France and Germany are on Russian gas at the very time Russians are slaughtering civilians in Ukraine. If only the coalition hadn't allowed itself to be bullied into empty net zero promises, we would at least have in this election, in this area, a clearer and better contest.